Welcome to Form, a counseling podcast. And we are so glad you've chosen our podcast to listen to today. We hope it's a blessing to you, and we hope to be able to use this as a resource. And so if you listen and you're helped by it, share it with somebody you know, and make sure that you like it because the algorithm's against this, ain't it, Rick?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, the
We know
algorithm's
we
against this. It
know
does
those
not want
parts.
our podcast to be out.
No, we might change lives or something.
It does.
In
Oh,
America.
that's right. We might. I would just also like to have the opportunity to just, talk to the people that I'm friends with on Facebook, for instance, and I can't even do that. So, if you have listened to the podcast and benefited from it, just please like it. Also, apparently, if you save a reel or a video or you share it, that actually does more than even liking and commenting now. So if there's a principle you like and you can share it to a trash folder or something, and it will at least help it not to disappear in the interwebs of the AI controlled mothership. I don't know. I'm just joking around. Um, okay, so this episode is a little different than our other episodes because we're not tackling one particular topic today as much as we are trying to do a summary of the topics that we have already talked about. And so today we're going through the 8 principles of a healthy relationship. And then we are taking some of the questions that you've submitted and going to try to answer those because, of course, as we go through and talk about these principles, there's always going to be exceptions. There's going to be things that pop out in your life that you go, well, I don't really know if this works out in that area. And that, of course, makes perfect sense. And so we brought Rick Dooley, um, master, lover, gentleman, and good friend, now almost co-host of the show, Rick Dooley, back to talk to you all and to answer your questions in regards to the problems that might have arisen as a result of trying to apply these, and also some things to look out for. So, Rick, thank you for being back today and helping
Absolutely.
us by going through these. Let's run through them again. It seems like we do this each time, and because we record multiple ones in a row, it feels maybe a little laborious to us. But truthfully, it's week to week the people hear the podcast. So let's go through the 8 principles again and give a brief summary, and then um, let's dive into a couple of the things that you wanted to say anyway that this would be a good time for, and then we'll get to some questions before we hang up for today.
Sounds good.
We're inviting the audience to listen in to our private phone conversations at this point. So this is what we're doing. Okay. The 8 principles of interpersonal relationship. Number 1, veritas. This is truth, honesty, integrity, and I think we have said and agree that this is the foundation of all 8 of the principles. Even
Right.
though they're not supposed to be taken individually, this is one of the biggies.
Yeah, I think your point that we've made multiple times that we're saying that this isn't going to work if you just pick out the one that you resonate with and you like and you don't like the other ones. But one of the foundational components really is this thing called veritas, and it is about being truthful, about being honest when it's hard to be honest, when you have integrity. And we have said before that integrity is about you taking on some of this extra weight that comes along with being honest. You become trustworthy, and people will expect you to be trustworthy. Maybe in the past, you might have not been a good, dependable truth teller and stretched the truth or done something else. And then once you shift, people have this expectation that I can depend on somebody now. I can depend on you to give me honest feedback, and you start to develop relationships around that, and you also start to develop your own internal compass, so to speak, to make it stronger for knowing when to speak truth. And again, we always couch that speaking truth in love. It's not always just what you say, it's sometimes how you say it, but you are stepping up to the plate and saying, I am making a decision that if somebody asks me something, I will be truthful with them. I will be dependable.
And you can't, shouldn't, won't speak the truth very well if you're not accountable for yourself, which is the imputable, the next principle.
Right.
If you're spouting off with your version of reality without being accountable for what is in your own heart and mind and life, you're really not speaking the truth in love. You're really seeking manipulation in some way.
Right. And we kind of tried to bring this in as almost like a legal concept of being imputable. So, you can charge me with my behaviors. So, I'm going to take responsibility for my behaviors, good or not so good. So, we always want to take responsibility for desired behaviors or desired outcomes, but sometimes when we mess up, we make mistakes, we mislead people, uh, we give wrong directions, and we're going to take the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Clint Eastwood. Third principle is rational, governed by reason and logic, objective and factual rather than bias. And so if you're trying to see if you're in a healthy relationship, you're trying to have a healthy relationship, you have to be both accountable and truthful, full of integrity, but also objective, able to see two sides of something.
Which can be a real challenge when we've got all
Especially when your
kinds of
side's
fact.
wrong, right?
Yeah, yeah. But we come into things with our histories, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that does make it more difficult to remain factual. So we might be able to see things clearly, and sometimes we're afraid to admit to facts or to accept facts because that might say something about challenging our former logic and us rethinking some things. But we want it to be based on facts because when you have facts and factual observations, it's helpful for everybody that's involved in this relationship. So it's very frustrating when somebody else is not being factual. When somebody else lies, that makes it very difficult. Like that's very clear. But when there's misperceptions, you and I just talked about how many conflicts simply come out of misunderstandings. Taking the time to be rational and objective and clarify, that probably could take care of 80%
And
of the conflict.
when we were talking about this on the episode, something that I remember is active listening is a big part of this because active listening requires you to take in what someone says and repeat it back to them and maybe even strengthen their argument, strengthen what they're saying as you're repeating it back to them so that they uh, not only feel heard and understood, but that they fully believe you understand what they've said. And by doing this, it actually helps us see an objective reality because it helps us see two sides better.
Uh, Excellent point when you're talking about that communication. When you are reflecting it back to them, I think what we're often afraid of is that we're going to get it wrong and the other person will get upset. What I find is generally when two people are actually trying to clarify and repeat back what they heard, the other person appreciates that you're actually making the attempt, an honest attempt to understand them, to clarify, to get rational, to get the facts. And that flows backwards on imputable and veritas. Like it will build those other two components and strengthen the relationship because you're taking the time to be objective and understand what I'm really trying to get across here. And I appreciate that. And that's what I find is when somebody's making that effort to be rational with you and to be objective and repeat that back, it'll build trust. It'll build veritas.
I'm primarily saying that because myself and others often feel like it's daunting to try to be objective or think that it's some complicated process in trying to see the other side. And I think it might be as just as easy as being able to actively listen. It might not be as complicated as you might be afraid that it is if you're wanting to do this, but feel overwhelmed by the idea of it. Um, that leads us to being temperate. You mentioned right sized. That is the perception of yourself being right sized, not thinking of yourself like, trying to have a tremendous amount of I've got this all under control. I'm great, but also not trying to belittle yourself constantly which is just a different form of pride, but really being right size, understanding your strengths and weaknesses, and seeing exactly who you are.
Good summary. Again, the world does not revolve around us. We're part of it. And knowing your size in it, what we found a lot of times is that people will think they're whatever they think everybody else should do. Like they're in command of the universe, that arrogant type of person. Or the polar opposite of that is somebody that just is so passive that they think anything that they do isn't going to matter at all. And we don't want to fall in either of those ditches. We want to have the right perception of ourselves. And even more importantly, we really want to have a perception of who we are in Christ. Because it's not just about what we think about ourselves, it's who are we in Christ? What does he say? Who is he? And who are we in relation to him? And we know we're going to be small in that aspect, but it doesn't mean that we're small in this world and in relationships. We're actually a big part of whatever relationship that we find ourselves in. We need to take that kind of seriously and not take over that relationship or shirk away from it.
That leads to being open minded and receptive to feedback. Part of being, I think, the right sized is the idea that you're open to feedback. People who have a wrong size mentality cannot hear feedback. They're either too beat up already to receive feedback or they're too prideful to receive feedback.
Good point. And that understanding where we get this unprejudiced, well, where we get our prejudice from, we're trying to come into the relationship with the principle of being unprejudiced. And so where we bring our biases is often how we were brought up, our culture, what our family dynamics were like, what experiences we have had. And experiences are different for all different people, but recognizing that we do bring them to whatever relationship that we have, and sometimes they're correct and sometimes they're not. The point is to not automatically assume that you're right, but to actually listen to other people, to challenge a little bit of that, and then make your determination. And then your determination is brought into this relationship with more confidence. It's a stronger position for you and for them. You can articulate your position, why you're saying or believing what you're believing, and somebody that's bringing you a challenge to listen to new information could be really wrong. But the fact that you take the time to challenge your own thoughts and then listen to them and clarify, kind of like what we were just talking about, what's that going to do to the dynamic of the relationship? You heard the person out, you're not changing your mind, you know that you're correct, and you have maybe that person changes their viewpoint over to yours. And sometimes that happens. But it's not going to happen if you just come in and you're just kind of a jerk because you just think, your way is the right way and you're not receptive to any constructive criticism from somebody else. It's going to be very difficult for them to accept constructive feedback from you. So it's the two-way street is what we're trying to say here. Is you like it when people listen to you, and try listening to them and see how that improves the relationship.
And that leads into obliging and really the next one as well, which is understanding. The concept that you have to go into this willingly, don't have to, you should choose to go into this willingly, putting forth effort because of your care for the other person. There's questions that people submitted in regards to that we'll get to later. Take these two together, connect them as we're going through here.
So obliging and understanding. Obliging has much more to do with that effort that we're going to put into that relationship. We're going to show up ready and willing to improve our relationship. We're not just expecting other people to bring the energy. It's kind of bringing our expectations of what we would like to see. We're bringing that first. And so we're not just leaving it up to everybody else to lead us. We're trying to lead other people. And when we make a commitment, we are going to fulfill it, hopefully, which that goes back into the part of the imputable. So we are responsible to do what we said that we were going to do. But with obliging, we really have a good attitude about it. We're very willing, and we love it when people show up that way for us. And then with understanding, that's more of that considerate aspect. We really like it when people are caring towards us and understanding about our circumstances. But sometimes we're a little short to take the time and extend grace and consideration and caring towards others. And so that can make it kind of difficult if we're expecting other people to do for us, but we're not doing it for them. And sometimes it's not fair, but we are trying to do more than what we expect another person to do. And so caring and consideration, that's part of that understanding principle that we're trying to bring to deepen our relationship.
And that leads us to the final eighth principle of sincere, which is actually more about being grateful, but you are making sure to connect authenticity and sincerity in your attempt at good relationships with gratefulness. And so sincere gratitude is really kind of the full thing, sincere gratitude.
Yeah, we're trying to actually have something that we can kind of hang our hat on, so to speak, of what we appreciate about another person. Like sometimes this can be very difficult in difficult relationships, but trying to find things that we appreciate about other people um, is a helpful skill to develop, and we can sniff it out when people are often insincere with us, when they're full of it and they're not, I guess, where they're playing games with us. And flattery is often not appreciated when you find out that it's hollow and it was there to manipulate you, versus what happens when you do work to appreciate that person you're in a relationship with, and you can articulate, why do I appreciate these things about that other person? And if you let that other person know that, and it's sincere, it's real. And you want real relationships. You don't want fake surface level relationships. I know they frustrate me. Um, and I think we have a craving for deep relationships. And that only comes through this principle of sincerity.
So we've got through all eight of these principles, and let's immediately go to one of the things that we were talking about. This is a shameless plug for a future episode, and the reason that you need to stay tuned is because there's going to need to be an episode where Rick and I discuss the irrational thinking errors. And this is brought up because this is one of the things that can actually be a stumbling block in applying these, or a difficulty to overcome as you seek to apply these and have a healthy relationship.
So, are you wanting me to talk about the irrational thinking errors, or what?
I left it silent to see what you do.
Okay. Well, this is where I think when you and we've talked about this, and I'll just
We
be
can't go into it much now. This is for a future episode.
we'll be a little
So,
transparent on this, but part of this is you're going to find that some of these attitudes you're really going to struggle with. They're going to be hard to implement. And part of
yes.
the reason why they're going to be hard to implement is not because of the other person necessarily, but because of your own thoughts that get in the way of your emotions. So
There you
when
go.
we're going to talk about like irrational thinking errors, they're they're basically key words, key concepts that can get us off of track. They're the type of things that come into our circumstances that we will think something and then it will produce an emotion. And then off of that emotion, we will then base our actions.
Mm,
And so sometimes that becomes problematic because we're running off of emotions, not more logical thoughts. And but we're not robots. So we are emotional creatures. We just want to be able to manage our emotions in a way that's going to build those relationships, but especially build our own thoughts and our own emotions.
excellent. And so that is an episode you and I will be recording together. We'll do an episode on that, maybe two. I don't know. There's a lot of them. There's at least 12 that I'm familiar with and often refer to. You might make a case for less. Some make a case for maybe a few more. We'll at least go over a dozen, I know, and that's a future episode that you'll have to tune back in for. At this time, what I'd like to do is go over some questions that folks have had who've been listening to the podcast, that have either come up to me or have submitted those or messaged me or whatever, and think through some of these things that they have ran into as they've been listening and trying to apply these. Okay, and so the first one, um, will be, some of these will be anonymous. I might give a shout out to somebody as we go through, but the first one would be, um, a person wrote in and said, essentially, I feel like my spouse has a personality disorder and doesn't always live in reality. How, basically, what guidance can you give in thinking through applying these principles with someone in that situation? That's
I
very
think that
generic, but it's the best
uh,
way to kind of summarize all that was said.
I just find that it's a valid question because other people are struggling with their own issues. And if you have gone through each of these episodes and you are understanding this concept of virtuous, it's a frustration when you start to develop skills, but the other person in your relationship doesn't. So you're learning how to manage your own responsibility, so to speak. Like you're making a commitment to being virtuous, but they're not. So, the question comes down to what do I do when the other person isn't, they don't know anything and they're not interested in knowing anything? Does that render this ineffective? I would say no, because of the concepts that we have said before. It's when you make a decision and bring to your awareness that you have the ability to influence this relationship. It's no longer dependent on the other person, it's dependent on your effort to exercise this or not. If you don't do it, I can guarantee you nothing's going to change. If you do this, you're going to find that there are things will change, and it probably will be harder than you thought. But remember, we're not talking about things that aren't godly principles. If you are practicing these things in a way that's to build up the relationship, I believe it's going to have that effect. And the reason I believe that is because I have witnessed this over and over and over again. And remember, I'm not talking about witnessing this in a clientele that's easy to work with. I'm talking about probably some of the most challenged individuals that have done a lot of prison time. And so they're used to having ingrained thinking patterns. But then when they start to manage their own behaviors and implement these principles, it affects the dynamic, it strengthens the relationship. Some people will be attracted to it and other people will run away from it. That decision won't be yours as to what they do with it. It will be your decision on how are you implementing this.
So that's kind of where I thought, that's kind of what I thought you would answer that like. And so what I'm hearing, just for clarity's sake, is that these principles applied are for the person. They're not without thinking about the person who might use these in a problematic relationship. They are used primarily for people that are having a problematic relationship, and so you're kind of doubling down, is what I hear, on the
But
fact that.
I'll triple down. I'll triple down because I've seen people, like they've gone to, just take this example, gone to doctor visits. The doctor visit goes very, very poorly. They're like, the doctors hate me. They won't do anything that I want them to do. They don't listen to me. And, but there was zero insight on that person. There was no, that principle of being imputable. There was no acceptance of responsibility of what was my attitude like when I walked in there. If you walk in there being very
Hmm.
entitled, being like, I'm the king of the world and you're my minions, that's not going very well in most any environment. And people don't have a good reaction to that. But I've seen people that they kind of take responsibility for themselves. They start to look at the rational side of things and become more objective and recognize I'm bringing in some poor attitudes here. You know, that entitlement that I show up with, I'm going to go in and let me be more temperate. Let me be right sized. And I'm going to thank them for seeing me today. I'm going to look and recognize they have seen 20 other clients today, and I appreciate the time that they're taking with me. And it's like you change your demeanor and you say, thank you for seeing me. I know you're really busy. I appreciate you taking the time to look at all and listen to all that I've brought to your attention. And I'm telling you that the doctor's reactions are different, the nurse's reactions are different, and the person comes back out and they're like, that was a whole new experience. And that whole experience wasn't based on anybody else other than the individual who decided that they were making a commitment to do something different, to get something different. The doctors weren't caring about it. They didn't know anything about it, but it did have a really big effect.
Yeah. And that's often, I mean, this is where the scriptures speak so clearly as to our responsibility to God is not dependent upon how the response from other people is. How we treat people is how we want to be treated. It's how, the Lord says, forgive so that you will be forgiven. So it's one of the verses that pops into my mind in Matthew. And the concept is just that we want to think about the audience of one. We're living unto the Lord. And so even if that causes persecution, even if that causes whatever, our responsibility and the things we adopt on our side are just that. They're what we're adopting. We're going to be like this. And I've already pointed out how all 8 of these principles are really all fulfilled in Christ, as the person who calls himself truth, who was completely accountable, but also took on the sin of the world, right? Became completely accountable to the utmost, if you will. No one more objective, no one more humble, no one more receptive to people of all different types and unprejudiced. No one more willing or caring, and no one more truly sincere and great and really filled with gratefulness to the Father, which he regularly demonstrated. So there's a sense in which what you're saying is like you'll triple down on these because it does change relationships. I love your example in even just the doctor's appointment, right? So if a person were to take these seriously, they're taking biblical understanding seriously, which means that I'm going to go in there and treat these people in a way that is good and right and biblical. And even if they don't respond to me well, let's say they're all still grumpy, and it may change their entire day. But the reason you're going into that doctor's appointment with a new attitude, applying these 8 principles, isn't to get them to have a different day and to all respond good to you. It's because these are right to have and to adopt as a person, even if you don't get the result you're looking for.
I think that we're probably not going to get the result that we were looking for most of the time. It's going to show up in a different way, and generally it will be better than what you thought it was going to be. But
Yes.
there is an old saying that says things get harder before they get easier, or things get worse before they
Yeah.
get better, right? And
Right.
I will say that there's a concept that says usually the hard thing and the right thing are usually the same thing. And it goes back to, well, why are you going to do the hard thing?
That's a
Why do
line in one of the songs by The Fray, which I won't sing because I think it's copyrighted and will be busted by the YouTube alerts. But yeah, the hard thing and the right thing are the same. Yeah, that's a great point.
Well, and if you are, I think the question is to ask, and I'm going to flip the script a little bit and ask Devin a question, which is there's a there's probably an nobody would discount the difficulties of trying to pastor a church. And people can often be difficult to work with. They can have misinterpretations of what somebody else was maybe trying to do something nice for them, and it gets misconstrued and causes conflict, or there's just a lot of tension sometimes, a lot of misunderstanding, um, a lot of things are under the surface that bring bias into why we perceive somebody else doing something. And I'm just saying there's so much in pastoring a church that has to do with relationships, and these principles of healthy relationships are often very difficult to implement and yet you try. My question to Devin would be, why try? Why bother? Why do this?
So you can sleep at night. I mean, there's a sense in which these principles applied well allow you to have a peace about your own efforts in the relationship, regardless of the outcome. There is a way. This is a way of being in my mind. This is a way to emulate Christ. And at the end of the day, if I didn't get the result I'm looking for, if I haven't been treated well, if I have had a rough day, or if everything didn't go like I wanted it to, what's the thing that we all do? I think it's not just me, but the thing we all do is we go back to that place and go, did I do my best? Am I trusting God like I ought to? What did I contribute? And we kind of take an evaluation. And I think that these 8 principles are a great way to take an evaluation of what I could have done better, what I did well, and how did I show up, as you keep saying, how did I show up in the relationships today?
And that's beautiful because you're having to live it and people know you. Like, this isn't fake. This isn't something that, either one of us are doing a perfect job on, but we do really want to do a better job at this. And I find it interesting that the name of this podcast is form. It's form. We talked about what that meant, the root word, but then we use it and we say we're going to transform and we're going to transcend. And I don't know how to maybe bring this concept up other than bringing the opposite, which is, sometimes we may not understand function, but we do understand dysfunction when we see it. Maybe we don't understand what it feels like to be healthy, but we do know what it feels like to be unhealthy. And sometimes we understand what it feels to be suffering, but we don't understand what could come out of choosing the harder path. And that
And
is goes
that's so
into
true, and especially if you're real neurotic, like I've talked about several times, right? Is that it's easier to figure out what not to do than it is to talk about what you could do, what you should do. It's
absolutely.
easier to talk about what to avoid than it is to set a goal.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Because then that brings in imputable. That brings in responsible. I am now responsible to do something other than just complain. I'll bring in an example of gossip, and I think and this is something that I have actually seen work really well. And again, in a population with people that are pretty sensitive to any kind of criticism, but in a group of people where somebody is gossiping about somebody else, and it's easy to just fall into that gossip and listen to that. But if somebody comes and brings you gossip about you, and you say to them, "Thank you very much for bringing that to me. I don't want the other person to think that way. Would you go with me back to that other person and let's have a conversation?" That's going to send a message of two things. One, you're not going to really be affected so much by the gossip that you'll take responsibility for that imputability. Like, whatever it is, I'll accept it. And I want you to go with me to go back to that person. And that other person might say, "I don't want any part of it. I'm not going to, I'm just here to gossip." They're not going to say that, but that's what they're doing. And, you know, they're, they're not going to get that reaction out of you, and they're going to get the message that if you bring some kind of nonsense to them, that they're going to expect you to take some responsibility and go back and address it. And so, like, you care enough to actually choose the harder path to go confront, hopefully in a good way. And that shuts down so much gossip. It just shuts it down because you're not willing to take the chance that that other person's actually going to go and do something about it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually leads to the next question as well, um, which I'm gonna go there next if you don't care. Which
Absolutely.
is there's a several questions that kind of had the same flavor to them, which is in regards to relationships. How do I know which relationships to invest in? Okay, so that's the big idea. More particularly, how do I determine which relationships to invest in order to use the principles? I think if I had to guess, and you correct me, what you would say to that person, I'm going to add to the question. So just quickly answering that initial part, I think you would probably agree that if we're going to adopt these, then we're being the type of person that just acts these out no matter who we encounter. But the question of what relationship should I invest in is an interesting and deeper question. So I want to kind of tackle that in just a second. Do you agree with the first part? Is that kind of the summary of what you'd say there? Is like, if you're adopting these, then you're becoming the type of person, which is kind of what you were just asking me. If you're adopting these, you're becoming that type of person that these flow out of you no matter what relationship you're in?
Absolutely, because I would totally agree with you because you're actually trying to develop a healthy lifestyle, and these are a healthy relationship. And so it doesn't really matter about who you're in a relationship with. It's how are you going to be in a relationship with almost anybody.
There you go. Because you just mentioned the doctor's appointment, and that kind of answers this, right? It's like you're not going to be in often you're not in an intimate, interpersonal, long-term relationship with a doctor and nursing staff. You
Right.
see them, and hopefully if you're in good health, you don't see them very often. And so it's not really this in and out of your life type of thing. And so if you're seeing a result of applying these in a doctor's office, then obviously it doesn't really matter who's coming and going in your life as much as you're becoming the type of person who's adopting these, and the results of these flowing out of you are evident. Now, the question that is kind of this question is kind of predicated on is: are there some relationships I should invest in and some I shouldn't? And I think we can both agree the answer to that is yes. There are some relationships we should invest in, and there are some relationships we should not invest in. And so, taking a little rabbit trail for a second, let's just discuss the concept of how to determine what relationship to enter into. So one person writes in and says, if I know now how to make relationships more healthy, is it up to me to do that in every relationship? Am I neglecting my Christian duties to withhold what I know to be good and true just because of my bias? See the episode on prejudice they put in parentheses. By the way, the great thing about the podcast and the worst thing about the podcast is that it's quoted back to me in public. Um, I love I desire a relationship. How do I know who I should desire a relationship with? What about difficult people I need to interact with but don't necessarily want a relationship with? Do I apply it the same? So let's talk for just a minute about the relationships you want to invest in. So the first thing that comes to my mind is kind of a tee up for you. Comes from first, let's go biblically. There's a sense in which Jesus calls us to love our enemies, and loosely defined enemies can be those against us. So just because you find opposition or conflict doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't be in that relationship. If you're looking for a counselor or a counseling mindset that says, girl, it's hard, get out of that, that's not here. You're not going to find that here, right? We have a higher calling than that script biblically, and our Lord does not allow us to go, this is hard, I'm out. That's not how that works. That being said, you cannot invest in every person and in every relationship that you come across. That's also unrealistic. And so there is got to be some degree of determination as to who you invest in, who you spend time with, and maybe it should or shouldn't be just based upon your own feelings and enjoyment. And so the next thing that comes to my mind, and again, this is Rick, I want you to jump in here after this. The next thing that comes to my mind beyond love your enemies, which is someone you're in a relationship with. An enemy is someone you know and have a relationship with that you don't like, is what Dr. Jordan Peterson would say about how to choose friends, which is that you choose friends based on people who want the best for the best part of you. I've always appreciated that because there are some people who seem to draw out the worst in others. And even though you get along with them real well, they seem to always pull on that side of you that's more tempted into things that are unhealthy, that are sinful, and that you shouldn't be heading toward. So it's nice to think in terms of choosing people that want the best for the best part of you, because what that means is that even if sometimes it's uncomfortable, you don't like it, there is something about this person that you've put yourself around that you know is wanting the best part of you to come out. and not that more licentious side. What do you say about this? Anything to add to that? Anything that you
I think that when we're developing these 8 principles for ourselves, we become much more aware of maybe something between healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships, and we are saying we're developing these relationships to make them healthy. But with that whole concept of being unprejudiced, we've said you don't want to be so open-minded that your brains fall out. So exactly what you're saying is there are some relationships that are not going to be healthy for you. So I really do think about people that are in early recovery from substance use, and they're wanting to hang out with their old friends. And that temptation, there's that old saying, is they're going to pull you down before you pull them up. And that's because you're kind of like in baby steps of your recovery. And then you got other people that are very strong in their recovery, and they can even be overconfident to be around people that could cause them temptation or risk of relapse. And so I'm just using these as examples because it's kind of easier to see this as we can be overconfident over here, and we can be maybe overconfident over here, even in the early stages, that we'll be okay. But other people do have influence on us, and I think having that the concept of being temperate is understanding we do allow other people to have influence when we interact with them. And so some people are going to pull us down more than we're going to pull them up. And having a realistic and a truthful observation about yourself and your limitations is one way of being able to determine which relationship is going to be good and growing and which one is going to be toxic and really going to dissolve my progress. And
and
so
this is one of the things. I'm sorry, go ahead, finish.
no, I'm saying it's more of the dysfunction that we're attempting to sort out is you're trying to get healthier and function better. Are they going to pull you down, or are you going to be able to, you know, weather some of those challenges? But I also just want to bring in a little other dynamic, which is if you're in a friendship, it's not the same thing as you're in a marriage. If you're in a dating relationship, it's not as if you are in a committed marriage. You have different obligations and commitments in a marriage than you would in just an acquaintance or a friendship. And so sorting those out and being able to determine which ones are going to pull me down and which ones am I going to help them. You might even need to get, humble yourself and get another person's feedback from that to be more objective on it, because maybe you don't see it, and being open to feedback when people give it to you is like, hey, that person's bringing you down, and instead of just trying to be stronger and better for everybody else.
How much of these principles help you choose better friends?
I think that it's easier to look at other people and see where their struggle is at, and often where we struggle is often where we point out somebody else's struggle. So let's just say, somebody has trouble with, I don't know, being rational. Like they're have difficulty because for whatever reason they're misperceiving things. They're consistently having issues with that. Um, that could be a tell that this is going to be difficult. I'm not saying whether or not you choose that relationship, but what I am saying is you have a better lens to see where the problem lies. Like you can actually say that person struggles with veritas. They lie. Those are not good things to build that relationship on if they are lying. You can say, I don't want to be in a relationship with somebody that lies to me. That's part of that being temperate, being the right size. It's okay to say, I don't want to be in a relationship where somebody's lying to me. How that other person responds to that, that's up to them. But you're seeking to be as healthy as you can be, to have these principles really ingrained in you, because people will react to that. They will either avoid it or they will be attracted to it. And I would just my hope is that the healthier you become, the healthier people are attracted to you. This is a hard concept for some people to understand.
I know where you're
Generally,
going with this.
healthy people are not attracted to unhealthy people.
I've
And,
heard that a bunch of times. Yep.
and I have been in some of my
Which
past.
means the scariest part of that concept is if you find yourself in a relationship and you go, man, this person's really unhealthy.
And
Well,
what,
how
so,
do you
so
think you ended up there?
what does that say about me? Is that I have things that I need to work on because that very unhealthy person was maybe attracted to me. That does not mean
Or
I can
you to
only
them
attract.
is my point, right? Maybe that's a wake up call to the fact that that's what you prefer because of something going on in you.
Absolutely. So that's that two-way street there. What I am saying is we often want to just get rid of that other relationship versus recognizing one of the best things. If I find myself in a committed relationship, one of the best things I can do is to get myself as healthy as possible because that other person will either follow my leadership and come out of their unhealthiness and we will both be stronger. And I'm telling you, like, if we're talking about a family and you're a husband and a wife, you're I hope you feel kind of that obliging sense that I'm going to give effort and being as healthy as I can possibly be because I want my spouse to be and I want my children to live under this roof of healthy parents. And so as healthy as we can possibly be is the best thing I can do. It's a worthy cause to undertake, and in that process, I may even discover what it feels like to be in a functional relationship and a healthy relationship. Whereas before I didn't recognize it. The healthier you get, the more unhealthy things present themselves to be. Like you can see them more clearly is what I'm saying.
Changing yourself, making these commitments, adopting these things actually changes who it is that you want to be around, so to speak, and invest in long-term relationships. And it would also affect who is attracted to you. That doesn't necessarily mean attracted is in a romantic relationship, but to you as far as who you bring your way because of these principles. Very interesting. There's a lot more we could go into there. I want to move along so we can get a couple more questions in before we wrap up. There's a question about almost each one of these, some of which I think that we can kind of blow through pretty fast. A couple almost are more theological in nature, but let me just throw one out. So, a question in regards to Veritas. So there's a question for each of the 8 principles we're going to try to run through. We'll see if we can get through all 8, at least one question from each category. So Veritas, how to know if you're keeping the peace as an excuse or just staying silent. Um, so what's the difference between the two, essentially?
So this is where, of course, we would probably look and go Veritas. Like, am I going to tell the truth? Like, if maybe I have an opinion about a controversial subject and somebody's asked me about it. So, keeping the peace would probably mean more that you're struggling with temperate, like being the right size. Like, I shouldn't say anything. I should just be passive and say nothing, or I should give my opinion on every single matter that's insignificant to the whole world. You know, so it's like we either want to give too much or give too little. In this situation, though, just keeping the peace, is that going to help bring out what we were talking about, some of the better qualities? And sometimes when we tell the truth, other people have to contend with the truth. And your responsibility is to truth, not to easy. And so if you find yourself just trying to keep the peace, that's being more passive than it is being helpful or useful. And you're also um, you're sacrificing your trustworthiness, your veritas, because if you just go along with people, they're not going to value what you say, and you're not going to value yourself as much either. And so again, that's going to affect the right sizeness,
How
the
you
temper.
show up and what size you are. Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Um, Next question from Imputable. Um, Several here that we could go from. Looking at this one, what's the difference between actual confession and just trying to explain myself? So I kind of
Like,
I kind of feel like that one's theological in nature. The first thing that comes to my mind is First John, uh, where he says that if we're faithful, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us. And that term there in Greek for confess actually means to say the same thing. And so the biblical concept of confession, first of all, it doesn't have to be to a priest. That's not in the scripture. But the high priest, Jesus, needs to be to Jesus. But it doesn't need to be to any man. That's not biblical. But the concept of confession means to say the same thing as God says about your sin. So that's the concept in First John. It's the concept throughout Scripture, but it's particularly there in First John, where it says, "Can we, if we confess our sins, He is faithful and just." It means to say the same thing as God says, and so to see ourselves rightly as God sees us, right? Sinful, in need of redemption, and then once redeemed in Christ, a new creation, born again, having and serving a new master. And so the concept of um, explaining yourself versus confession in relationships. Um, how do you distinguish between the two? I have a thought about it. I want you to go first.
I think that the we actually you said you brought up kind of the imputable, which is, am I going to take responsibility? Am I going to be able to accept what I have done? And I think that difference there is when I'm trying to explain myself, that could be much more along the lines of you trying to manipulate and control how somebody views you, versus that imputable breeds a certain sense of um, confidence while admitting to your mistakes. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's going to get everything right. But when you're talking about using these principles in a healthy relationship, you accepting the responsibility for your actions helps build a healthy and trustworthy relationship. So we get veritas, we get imputable, we get rational, we get all of these things. So the fear is that if I tell the truth, if I have to explain myself, if I lie, that I'm going to lose this relationship. That's, if you're lying, you are losing the relationship. When we are committed to truth, we're gaining and we're building, even though it's rocky, even though it's hard. But I really do want to I want to pass along this one concept about this process, is that it's a process, not a one-time event. And so you're trying to do these things in the relationship, and sometimes you're going to get it right and sometimes you're going to get it wrong. And so be easy with yourself, and you'll probably be easier with other people when they get it right.
The judgment you use, you will be judged by. That's where that comes out. The criticism that I often dish out is what I'm afraid of getting. So if you're kind to people who are, like you just said, if you show compassion in that way, maybe you'll have a little bit more compassion coming back, or that you'll give yourself a little bit more compassion as you're seeking to do this. Rational. Am I reacting to what's actually happening or to my interpretation of it? How do I know? How do you determine between how objective you're able to be? And how can you become more objective? Other than the active listening, which we mentioned at the beginning of the show.
So there is a concept of attempting to see if you are being more rational, so to speak. And that is when you are, if you use this concept of a camera concept, about if a camera were recording me and I was discussing my imputable responsibility here, the way that I describe it, would it be the same as it was recorded? So it's a third party device. And if, say, I'm having a conflict with two people and I'm in the conflict, with how I am interpreting this, would that be the same way as the camera recorded, and that the other person, we could at least agree on the facts of what was recorded? That's one way of being able to see that I'm not being so biased.
A person who asks a question like this is obviously going to be far enough along to use that very helpful test to do that. I mean, I immediately think of people who've worked with who wouldn't even be able to get that far, who wouldn't be able to actually see that the camera lens, so to speak, that it's in a different reality, right? That's a different kind of problem. But the person who's astute enough to ask a question like that would be able to um, understand that they and the other person both need to be able to agree on the facts. I think that's great. That's helpful. Um, Temperate. Um, Main question here: any examples of, because temperate, having to do with self control and humility. Any examples of restraint in conflict would be helpful. So it's not really a question as much as, is there any ideas about what restraint looks like or what being temperate looks like in the middle of conflict? So we've talked on one of our podcast episodes about the magic ratio, the 5 positive interactions to 1 negative interaction in regards to conflict. I think that, again, if you're taking all of these together as you should, that you're not looking for just restraint. You're looking for humility, right sizedness, and unbiased. You're looking for what the feedback you're getting is. Something I always appreciate that Peterson says oftentimes, I give him credit for this because this is one of his main quotes you'll see all over the internet, is if someone is not, if you feel that someone's not listening to you, you can stop talking. And that's the biblical injunction of, don't cast your pearls before swine, meaning that if you have something valuable and you're offering it to someone who doesn't value it, that you're throwing it away. And the concept is that your opinion and what you're trying to communicate may be valuable, but if the person's not listening, stop talking. And he says start watching them, because they'll tell you exactly what they're about if you'll just start paying attention. And so I don't think necessarily restraint is what you're looking for as much as, if you're adopting these 8 principles, you're looking yourself to be, caring and willing and receptive to feedback and right-sized, humble and objective and accountable and truthful. That if you're seeking to do those things and you find an unreceptive, unwilling person that you're speaking with, what you could do, as Peterson has said, and as we're kind of laying out here, is you can stop talking and you could start listening and see what it is they're about that's not getting through.
I think that is one of the things that you're bringing up is how you brought in the other principles to try to figure out how I'm using this particular principle about being restrained. Because, we are trying to be caring. And if you're not caring, but you're trying to be restrained, sometimes that can come off as arrogance or self-righteousness versus like what you're saying is not important to me. And it can be important to me, and I can still stop talking and I can still disengage. The One of the things that might be helpful for that, for being restrained and being temperate and being right sized, is when you see that things are really becoming problematic, is if you do disengage, you say, hey, maybe we can take 5 minutes and then come back and talk about this a little bit more. That little bit of restraint, and that little, you're also letting that other person know that you care about what they're saying, you're going to come back to it, and that you can discuss it a little bit more, but it gives people a little time to cool off, become more unprejudiced, unbiased, and be more rational, and then come back to the conversation. Because if you just disengage, stop talking, walk out of the room, that can cause all kinds of dynamics, from somebody pursuing you when you're leaving and then they just nag you, but what you did is you said, I'm actually going to stop right now. This isn't really being helpful or productive. What you're saying is important to me, but I want us both to be in a better mindset to talk about this. So let's give it 5 minutes. 5 minutes doesn't work. Say I need another 10 minutes. I'll come back at 10. Say I need a half an hour. Whatever it is, honor the commitment to come back and talk about it.
And I think it's worth saying, pausing in a conflict does not mean you're unwilling or uncaring.
Very good point. Very good point.
It often be interpreted like that, but it doesn't mean that. It's worth saying
And
that
this
out
is,
loud.
and as we were talking about the healthy relationships, the more that if you're able to speak the same language on these, if you actually brought these terms into the relationship, you're saying, I'm struggling with being rational right now. I'm
Yeah,
maybe my I'm not seeing this correctly right now. Um, the healthier the relationship becomes because you're both speaking that same language, and then you appreciate it. And you also know, just like as if you were trying to learn a new language like French, it's not just going to take hold overnight. It's going to take some practice, and it's like you're not mad that the other person got the words wrong. You're appreciating that they're trying to learn the language
that's
because you're
exactly
both.
right. This has been hugely helpful in vocabulary to have this to share a same vocabulary with people that you're talking to in a relationship with is incredibly helpful because you do come to that place where you're using the same words, you know that you're meaning the same thing by those words, and you're actually able to get further with that. That has actually been hugely helpful. I think others have felt the same way. I'm going to end with two questions. One is um, they're both reflective questions, really, for the audience more than they are just for us to answer. Um, and the first one is: do you actually believe change is possible, or have you grown cynical? And it's just a reminder of the gospel once again that we so often think it doesn't matter what I do. I'm stuck in this place with these particular people, and there's no hope for me, and there's no hope for this situation, and there's a great deal of hopelessness. And I just want to remind you again that God is in the business of changing people, and that includes us. And if you're hearing these and you know that you need to apply these, if you know you lack in these areas and you see the biblical foundation, the practical application, and you feel that maybe conviction, I don't know what it is, that's a call to change. It's a call to try this and be different. Because, like we talked about earlier, at the end of the day, if you're applying these things, you rest well knowing that you've contributed, even if you don't get the result you're looking for. But I would say that with that, we also believe in a God who changes people. And as Rick has said, practically speaking, applying these 8 principles in your relationships will in fact garner a different response. It will bring forth from other people you're in a relationship with a different response because you're not doing what you've always done if you are trying these for the first time. And just changing how you behave does change how other people respond to you. Agree with that, Rick? Anything you want to add to that?
I think that's a critical component, is recognizing if you pursue these, you cannot help but have an impact on all of your relationships. And to back up to what you had said before about as Christians, it really doesn't matter so much about our own self perception. It really matters about our perception in relationship to who God is. And so I personally understand, resonate with it doesn't matter what I do, nothing is going to change. Well, not doing anything guarantees there's no change. And I think that's a deception. I think it's untrue. And movement forward is one of the best ways to get out of anxiety, pull yourself one step at a time out of depression. And it's that movement in a right direction, in a righteous direction, in a virtuous direction that will bring about a change that generally reinforces itself and motivates you to do more of it because you witness the change that you're having and experiencing. And then the healthier you get, the healthier the relationships become because people that are healthier will be attracted to it and people that are unhealthy will be repelled by it. And so you might find that you have more virtuous relationships that you enjoy and that are helpful and that are healthy. And, it's not so hard to conceive that people that would practice this say there's 40 people that get together and start practicing this, they all start getting better together. And they form relationships at a deeper level that will be long lasting and that you don't want to lose versus being in relationships that you just endure. And so we want to create relationships
That's a
we
big difference right there, is relationships you want to enjoy, not just relationships you have to endure or that you're even choosing to endure. Endurance and thriving are wildly different.
excellent
And
point.
so, yeah. So the second question I was going to pose to the audience is just, what is a concrete step? What is a practical step that you need to take today? Not just think about, not just listen to this and walk away, but what's something you're going to try when you get home with your wife? What are you going to try with your husband? What are you going to try with your friend or the church member or your kids or whoever, your boss? What's something that you're going to look at this and go, I don't really do that. I haven't done that before, and that you're going to make a commitment and do. Challenge you with that. I hope that you will listen to this, go away from here, and not just think about it, but actually give it a shot, because this is created as a resource, and we're doing these, and we hope that you will as well.
Could I give a
I
challenge
want,
to this?
yeah, go.
And it would be to take a moment, reflect over the 8 principles, find the one that you struggle with the most, make a commitment to do the smallest goal that you can set to see if it does anything, and then evaluate it and see if it did anything. If it went right, reevaluate it. And I would also like to say, when it comes to, I know people will say, leave it in the comments and whatever. Like, we're being genuine when we say that. If you try this
Absolutely, shoot a message.
and you put it in there, other people will see that. And sometimes it'll work out and other times it won't. We do want to encourage people, and people practicing this is where the real results happen. And so that I do hope that people would, you know, put themselves out there to just give some encouragement to some other people as to what happens when you make small steps, because small steps do have big impact.
Absolutely. And you can ask this from the people in your relationships. You can say, hey, I'm working on this intentionally. And if you're both listening to this together, then there's a lot of grace to be given in that. And it's also helpful to know that you and someone that you love are both trying to improve in the same way, using that same vocabulary again that we talked about earlier. Please let us know if this is helpful, and also if you have more questions, we'll have another one of these Q&As with Rick very soon. Tune in here in a couple weeks where we'll have Rick back again to discuss these irrational thinking errors. Come back and listen to that as well, so that you can be anticipating that. If you enjoy the podcast, just share it with those that you love, and give us a like or comment. We'd appreciate it, as it does help a tremendous amount, considering that the social medias and things don't often want you to be able to reach everybody without lots of money. And so we ask that you do that. That helps us in all kinds of ways. Thank you for joining us again. Thank you, Rick, for helping all of us in thinking through these healthy principles of a healthy relationship. Look forward to having you back again to walk us through these irrational thinking errors in the future. And for right now, we appreciate all of you, and we look forward to when we see you again next week.
Bye, everybody.